One impulsive decision to save a stranger was all it took to dissolve the quiet, careful life that Neve Callahan had spent years assembling, one paycheck and one calculated risk at a time. She would understand this later, lying on a narrow cot in an operations room buried beneath a century-old farmhouse north of Orangeville. Listening to rain work its way through the cedar windbreak outside, she would trace the thread back to that single moment on a hotel terrace and wonder at how thin the line had been, between the ordinary Thursday evening she'd expected and the one she actually got. But that recognition came later. At 9:47 p.m., Neve stood at the side entrance of the Shangri-La Hotel's grand ballroom, violin case in hand, waiting for her break to end. The Meridian Capital Charity Gala was the kind of event that reminded Neve precisely how far she was from the life she'd imagined at 16, sitting cross-legged on her grandmother's kitchen floor in Sudbury, with a borrowed instrument pressed under her chin. Back then she had believed that if she practiced hard enough and wanted it badly enough, music would carry her somewhere extraordinary. It had in a fashion, just not the one she'd pictured. She had graduated top of her cohort at the Royal Conservatory in Toronto. She had the technique, the ear, the instinct, the kind of musicianship her professors had described, in the careful language of institutional praise, as genuinely exceptional. She also had $74,000 in student debt, a one-bedroom apartment in the annex that smelled faintly of damp insulation, and a younger brother named Finn, whose autoimmune condition required treatment that the province's health coverage didn't fully reach. Playing for wealthy strangers 3 nights a week was how Neve kept the gap closed. She had made her peace with that arrangement. It was honest work, and honest money was not something she could afford to be particular about. She loosened her bow and rolled the tension from her right shoulder. The ballroom behind her hummed with the self-important drone of Toronto's financial and philanthropic elite, the kind of people who wore watches worth more than her car and clapped for the charity auction without once glancing at what they were bidding on. She stepped outside onto the stone terrace to clear her head. The terrace ran along the south face of the hotel, suspended above a landscaped courtyard 12 floors below. The November air off Lake Ontario was immediate and cold, carrying the distant sound of a streetcar on King Street and the ordinary, indifferent noise of the city. Neve set her violin case against the railing and exhaled. She was about to go back inside when she heard the voices. Low and deliberate, the particular register of men choosing not to be overheard. 2 of them, then a third, deeper and slower, coming from around the curved bend of the terrace where the light from the ballroom windows didn't reach. Neve almost turned away. It was a private event. Difficult conversations happened at these things. But she moved 2 steps along the railing and looked around the curve of the wall, and then she stopped. 3 men. 2 of them had pressed a third against the stone railing above the courtyard drop, one holding a compact, suppressed weapon low against his ribs and angled upward. The third stood at his left, blocking any sightline from the windows behind them. The man against the railing was broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit that fit the way expensive things do, as though it had been made specifically for the geometry of his body. He wasn't struggling, his hands hung open and still at his sides. He was looking at the 2 men the way someone looks at a problem they've been expecting, not afraid, but calculating, weighing something. He was going to go over that railing, Neve understood, or be shot and tipped. From 12 floors above a concrete courtyard, it didn't matter which. No one else was on the terrace. The quartet inside had resumed. No one was coming. Neve picked up her violin case, straightened the hem of her gown, and walked around the bend of the terrace wall as though she had been looking for this specific corner and was entirely unsurprised to find it. Mr. Mace. She aimed her voice at the glass doors behind her, loud enough to reach the hotel staff visible just inside, loud enough to make the moment public. "I have been looking everywhere. The Meridian table has been asking for you. Mr. Whittaker from Brookfield has been standing at your chair for 15 minutes. All 3 men turned. The two strangers went rigid. Their eyes cut to the glass doors, to the staff moving behind them, to the cluster of guests near the entrance who had turned at the sound of her voice. Neve kept her gaze fixed on the man against the railing, the one she'd named without any real certainty that was his name, and held it with the same professional steadiness she'd spent years developing for playing Brahms for rooms full of people who would rather be talking. He looked at her. His eyes were dark and precise, and something passed through them quickly, genuine surprise, and then a recalibration, sharper and more deliberate than the first. He straightened. He brushed the front of his jacket once, unhurriedly, and stepped away from the railing with the composed ease of a man who had simply been admiring the view. "Of course," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, a controlled baritone that gave nothing away. "I apologize. I got turned around." He crossed to her and offered his arm. Neve took it. Her hand was shaking. She willed it to stop. Behind her, she heard one of the men say something low and cutting in a language she didn't recognize. Then the sound of weight shifting. By the time Neve and the man she'd called Mr. Mace reached the glass doors, the curve of the terrace behind them was empty. Inside, the warmth and gala noise folded around them. Neve kept walking. She did not look back. "The elevator," he said quietly. "Not a question." They crossed the lobby in silence. In the mirrored elevator doors, Neve studied her own reflection. Upright, face composed, jaw holding something tight. She looked like someone performing calm rather than feeling it. Beside her, the stranger looked exactly as he had on the terrace, like a man whose internal temperature never varied by more than a degree in any direction. The doors closed. "Who are you?" she asked. "Jericho Mace." He said it the way people state a postal code, factual without weight. "And you just saved my life, which means you need to understand what happens next." "What happens next is I go back and finish my set." "You won't be able to." Not unkind, entirely without softness. "The men on that terrace have surveillance on this building. Your face will be on their footage within the hour. Your name is on the gala's session musician roster. That's enough to find you." The elevator opened. Neve stepped out into the lobby with every intention of walking back to the ballroom, collecting her fee envelope, and never thinking about any of this again. 4 men in dark suits were already crossing the marble floor toward them. They moved with the synchronized, measured efficiency of people who do this professionally. Guests parted for them without quite knowing why. "We have a problem in the parkade," the tallest one said to Jericho Mace, low and close. "Berekoff had additional units we need to move." Jericho glanced at Neve. "She comes." "Absolutely not," Neve said. The secondary exit was already opening. A hand settled at the small of her back, not grabbing, not forcing, simply present and moving forward. Neve went. Outside, 2 armored black SUVs idled in the loading zone, engines running, condensation rising from the exhaust into the cold night. Neve was guided into the rear vehicle with practiced impersonal efficiency. Jericho slid in beside her, the locks engaged. They were on King Street before she found words again. "Tell me what's happening." He told her. Calmly, without embellishment, in the manner of someone delivering a briefing rather than a confession. The Berekoff organization, a criminal network operating across Ontario and Quebec, moving money through shipping contracts and labor arbitration and several categories of activity that appeared on no legitimate ledger. Jericho Mace, a problem for them for approximately 18 months. Tonight, an escalation he had miscalculated the timing of. "What kind of organization do you run?" Neve asked. He looked at the city outside the tinted glass. "One that operates across several sectors, and the sectors that aren't legitimate." He didn't answer. In Neve's experience, the silences that answered questions were often more reliable than the words. She was still tracing the shape of this, the implication of it, what it made the man sitting beside her, when the world outside the vehicle went violent. The crack of gunfire preceded her understanding of it, a flat mechanical percussion against the armored doors, sparks raking the asphalt as the driver accelerated hard and swung them onto the 401 on-ramp. Jericho's arm came across her chest, driving her into the footwell, his body curving over hers, and Neve pressed her palms flat against the floor mat and breathed. "Lead vehicle is clear, continuing north." The driver's voice was controlled. "Decker." "Decker," a second voice from the front passenger seat. "Wrong register, too compressed." And then nothing. Neve came up before she'd decided to move. Decker had slumped forward in the passenger seat, one hand lifted and then dropped. The driver was holding the wheel with his right arm and pressing his left against Decker's side, his voice low and repetitive and saying the man's name. Neve reached over the seat. "Move your hand, let me see." Entry wound, left side, below the clavicle. Exit wound at the back of the shoulder. Bleeding heavily, but not pulsing. Not arterial, not yet. She found his pulse. Present, unsteady, functional. "First aid kit under the rear seat," she said. "Jacket, shirt, something to pack this now." "You're a session musician," Jericho said from behind her. His voice was strange, not disbelieving. "Something more considered than that. I spent 3 years as a wilderness first responder before I auditioned for conservatory." She took the kit from his hands without looking at him. She packed the wound with hemostatic gauze, applied direct pressure, kept her voice flat and instructional. "Keep talking to him. Tell your driver, no hard braking. How far to wherever we're going?" 40 minutes. "He'll make 40 minutes, keep him awake." For 40 minutes on the dark highway north of the city, Neve worked. Jericho handed her what she asked for and held Decker steady through the turns and said nothing that wasn't necessary. And somewhere in the tunnel of clinical focus, she became aware of the quality of attention coming from the back seat, patient and absolute and not announcing itself. The farmhouse north of Orangeville sat behind a cedar windbreak and looked like nothing from the road. Below the main structure, behind a reinforced door off the kitchen, was an operations room. Clean, fluorescent lighting, white walls, a medical locker that made Neve exhale with a relief she didn't bother to hide. She worked for another 90 minutes. Jericho stayed. He didn't question her. He didn't pace or interrupt or offer opinions on her process. He followed instructions with the same precise and unornamented competence he'd shown all evening, adjusting the light when she asked, maintaining pressure when she needed both hands free, monitoring Decker's breathing with a focus that had nothing performative in it. When Decker's vitals finally steadied and the monitoring equipment settled into its quiet, reliable rhythm, Neve stripped off her gloves and dropped them in the biohazard bin. She sat down on the stone floor with her back against the wall. She was still in the gala gown. It was thoroughly ruined. Jericho crouched in front of her. He didn't touch her. He was quiet for a moment in the way that felt like a deliberate choice. "He would have bled out in that vehicle," he said. "I know. You knew exactly what you were doing, under fire in a moving car." "I knew what I was doing," Neve said. She looked at the stone wall opposite, old mortar, last century, cool and solid and indifferent to all of it. "I want to go home. Finn has a clinic appointment Friday morning and I have a set tomorrow night." "I know," he said it simply without deflection. "And that's going to happen, just not tonight." Neve looked at him directly. In the fluorescent light of the operations room, with Decker's monitor beeping its steady reassurance in the background, and rain audible against the farmhouse ceiling overhead, Jericho Mace looked almost human in a way that the hotel terrace hadn't permitted. The scar at his temple caught the light. He was watching her with those grey, measuring eyes, and what was in them now was not the cool calculation from the terrace. It was something slower, something that looked like it had been working its way to the surface for a while. "The Berekoff organization has your face from tonight," he said. "They'll want to understand what you mean to me. As long as they don't know the answer to that question, you're in an uncertain position." He paused. "I don't leave uncertain positions unresolved." "What does that mean specifically?" "It means I'm going to handle this, and it means you're under my protection until I do." He held her gaze, entirely steady. Not because I am a good man. I'm not going to make that claim, and you're too intelligent to believe it anyway. But because you walked onto that terrace when every reasonable instinct should have taken you back inside, and you kept Decker alive in the back of a moving car when most people would have been frozen on the floor. And I don't yet know what to make of you, Neve Callahan. But I know I'm not going to let the Berekoff network be the ones who answer that question for me. Outside, the rain worked through the cedar windbreak in long, slow waves. Neve listened to it. 72 hours, she said. You handle this in 72 hours, and then you drive me home yourself. Something shifted across his face, almost imperceptible. Not warmth, exactly. Something more serious than warmth, and likely more lasting. 72 hours, said, you have my word. Neve leaned her head back against the cool stone wall and closed her eyes. Finn's clinic appointment was Friday. Her violin was still in the back of the armored SUV. The city was 40 minutes south, and the November rain was coming down through trees that were older than anything she'd ever worried about. Somewhere to her left, the monitoring equipment beeped steadily for a man she had kept alive with her hands. She thought about the way Jericho Mace had looked at her at the end. Like someone encountering a fact they hadn't budgeted for and were already trying to decide what it changed. 72 hours, she told herself. But somewhere in the back of her mind, in the quiet place where she'd always known things, before she had the language to name them, Neve Callahan already understood that 72 hours was probably only the beginning. If Neve's steady hands in that operations room left you holding your breath, go ahead and hit that like button right now. Do you think Neve can keep her independence, or is Jericho Mace the kind of man who doesn't honor a 72-hour deal once he's decided what he wants? Drop your theories in the comments below. We read everyone. Share this with someone who loves a story where the ordinary person turns out to be anything but. And subscribe to Cruel Boss Stories so you don't miss what happens when Neve and Jericho face the Berekoff organization head-on.